On Saturday evening, October 17th, 2015, Jacky Sutton, a British media expert and activist, landed in Istanbul at 9:58 p.m. aboard Turkish Airlines flight TK-1986, having previously booked her journey from London Heathrow to Istanbul and onward to Erbil. She arrived at Ataturk Airport carrying luggage filled not only with clothes and personal items, but also with books for her PhD research, gifts for the children of her Kurdish friend Hiwa Osman, and 10 kilograms of animal food for a rabbit she had recently rescued. Everything initially appeared normal. With roughly 2 hours to wait for her connecting flight, Sutton bought 2 bottles of wine she had earlier promised to Osman's family, then went to the lounge, where she drank 2 cans of beer while reading a John Grisham novel. According to a cafe employee, she was not seen speaking to anyone during this time. After about an hour, she moved to a waiting area, but since boarding had not yet begun, she sat down and soon fell asleep. When passengers for the Erbil flight were called to board, Sutton did not move and showed no reaction. At 12:15 a.m., when her plane departed on schedule, she was still asleep in her chair. 15 minutes later, the activist walked to the departure gate but found it closed. At first, she did not appear panicked. She then went to an information desk, where she was told that her luggage had been unloaded and that she should proceed to the ticket counter. There she learned that the next flight to Erbil would depart 12 hours later and that, due to company policy, her original ticket could not be exchanged or rebooked, meaning she would need to purchase a new one. Sutton told the staff she had no money for another ticket and began to cry, but employees said they could do nothing and instructed her to leave the secure area. After confronting the situation, and as other passengers boarded their flights, the visibly distressed and possibly slightly intoxicated woman entered a restroom in the transit area of the international arrivals level at around 1 a.m., and she was never seen alive again. Over the next 7 minutes, 7 women used the restroom, including 3 Russian tourists, who discovered that Sutton's legs had collapsed inside a stall and that her body was hanging by her shoelaces from a coat hook on the inside of the door. They ran through the transit hall and alerted the medical team, but resuscitation efforts failed. When police arrived, Jacky Sutton was found with 2 bank cards and a large amount of cash on her. None of her belongings were missing. Unconfirmed Turkish media reports claimed there were $2,000 in her luggage, while other sources stated that 2,300 euros were found in her wallet. Her death shocked many, as missing a flight would not normally be considered a reason for suicide, and the circumstances of the tragedy raised multiple suspicions. Sutton had previously spoken out loudly against Islamic State and was openly pro-Kurdish, a highly sensitive stance not only in Turkey, but also in Iraq and Syria, given the independence aspirations of the more than 40 million strong, stateless Kurdish population. Adding to the unease was another mysterious death a year earlier, when Serena Shim, an American journalist, died in a car accident in Turkey after reporting that she had witnessed Islamic State fighters being smuggled across the Turkish border into Syria.
Jacqueline Ann Sutton was born in 1965 in Hatfield, Hertfordshire, about 36 kilometers north of London, into an educated, middle-class family. She had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and for a period during her childhood, the family lived on the grounds of Hatfield House, a country residence whose history stretches back to the 15th century, when a royal palace once stood there. Later, partially demolished and rebuilt in the 17th century in the Jacobean style. Hatfield itself is notable for having been the place where several English monarchs spent their youth, including Anne Boleyn's daughter, the so-called Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, and her half-sister Mary I, both daughters of the famously feared King Henry VIII. Jacqueline lived there only for a time, because at the age of 7, her family moved to Malden in Essex, where her parents purchased Malden Court School, an institution that functioned roughly as a reform school for young people. From the age of 8, Jacqueline adopted the nickname Jacky, spelled with a Y rather than the more common IE, simply because she hated the Jacky magazine. Her teenage years were marked by several health struggles, including a period of anorexia, and according to her sister Jenny, she lacked self-confidence, which only drove her to push herself harder in life. Jacky initially attended a girls' grammar school in Colchester, but disliked it so intensely that she transferred to a vegetarian boarding school, where she met young people who had fled or been expelled from countries such as Iran and Iraq. She later graduated from the University of Warwick with a degree in English literature and Spanish, then spent 2 years in Ontario helping to build houses for Indigenous Canadian communities. Those who knew her described her as fearless, deeply caring, and loving, someone who devoted nearly her entire life to humanitarian work and was exceptionally competent in the field. Jacky spoke 5 languages, including Arabic, and lived for extended periods in conflict-affected countries such as Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and even Gaza. Between 1998 and 2000, she worked as a journalist and producer for the BBC World Service, reporting from Africa, the Middle East, and London. And she also briefly contributed to Vatican Radio while living in Rome. While her professional life flourished, her private life was often marked by loss. In 1998, her mother died after being diagnosed with breast cancer, and in 2000, Jacky married Charles, a member of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, whom she had met in Eritrea. Despite loving each other, they divorced 4 years later, largely because their views on U.S. foreign policy became irreconcilable after 9/11. Jacky opposed military solutions entirely, while Charles supported them. In 2004, she also lost her father, a mathematics teacher. By the age of 39, Jacky was largely alone. Both parents were gone, her marriage had ended, she had no children, only 2 rescued cats, and she lived almost entirely for her work. One of those cats, named Genghis, was a one-eyed, toothless stray she had found on the streets of Iran, and later smuggled out with her when she was forced to leave the country. In the years that followed, she worked in senior roles for the United Nations Development Program in Afghanistan, Iran, West Africa, and Gaza, and in 2008, she led a media and elections project for the organization in Baghdad. After 25 years of international aid work, she bought an apartment and settled in Canberra in 2013, transforming it into a distinctive home decorated with carpets and ceramics collected over decades. At the time of her death, she was pursuing a PhD at the Australian National University, focusing on international development support for Iraqi and Afghan media professionals between 2003 and 2013, and since July 2015, she had been conducting fieldwork in Erbil. Alongside her studies, she gave private lessons to more than 130 students.
and friends recalled that she was known for cycling everywhere. Despite being an experienced war reporter, she enjoyed the quieter rhythm of academic life, though she admitted she missed the adrenaline, once saying that it could become addictive. A colleague, Elizabeth Mulhall, later noted that Jacky constantly talked about how eager she was to return to the field. In late June 2015, she was appointed Iraq Director of the London-based Institute for War and Peace Reporting, following the death of her predecessor, Ammar al-Shabandar, who was killed along with 16 others in a car bomb attack in Baghdad claimed by the Islamic State. A week before her fatal journey, Jacky attended al-Shabandar's memorial service at St. Bride's Church on Fleet Street and stayed at her two-bedroom flat in Acton, West London. In Iraqi Kurdistan, she worked with a Kurdish journalist to collect stories from Iraqis, Kurdish Christians, Sunni and Shia Muslims, and Jews, aiming to highlight how these communities had once lived together peacefully before war and foreign intervention deepened sectarian divisions, as her sister Jenny later explained. At the same time, IWPR was actively countering the growing misogynistic messaging of Islamic State. Friends and colleagues were aware of the risks. Susan Hutchinson recalled that Jacky knew her predecessor had been killed and fully understood that it was dangerous work in a dangerous country. In June, Jacky wrote an email to her friend Amanda Whitley at Her Canberra, describing the risks of her new role and explaining that she had changed accommodation in Erbil because her previous room had no escape route in the event of an attack. She wrote that she was staying temporarily in a quiet hotel with almost no guests, essentially a single room and bathroom above the office, with only one entrance and exit, meaning she would be trapped if someone forced their way in. Something her Kurdish friends warned could happen if a fanatic decided after Friday prayers that killing foreigners was jihad. She planned to move soon into a gated community with Kurdish friends, including Hiwa Osman and his family. Despite everything, she loved Iraq and Erbil, writing that it felt wonderful to be back and that her friends from Baghdad and Erbil had been calling her constantly. In the same email, she revealed that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after being arrested on suspicion of espionage during her 5 years in Eritrea, an experience she described as life-changing. She had briefly taken Prozac in 1995, but stopped after a month due to what she called seriously strange side effects, and she was permanently expelled from Eritrea in 1998. Stories from colleagues illustrated her character vividly, such as one recalled by an AIDS-diagnosed journalist friend from West Africa, who said Jacky stayed by his side even when others were afraid to come near him. In the autumn of 2015, she had ambitious plans for the future, including a project to teach Iraqis how to use social media to counter extremism. On September 29th, she learned that the proposal had been approved, with IWPR awarding $1 million to the program, describing her as full of innovative plans to combat violent extremism in a country she cared deeply about. Friends said she was elated, riding high with excitement. Even amid her packed schedule, she submitted a chapter of her doctoral thesis shortly before traveling, and was in the process of buying an apartment in Spain, having already transferred the deposit. The weeks leading up to her departure were intense and eventful, though not without sorrow, as several friends and colleagues had fallen victim to terrorism that year. And it was against this backdrop that Jacky Sutton once again set out for the Middle East.
On October 19th, the Institute for War and Peace Reporting publicly called for an open and transparent investigation, while a journalist friend of Jacky's, Rebecca Cook,
urged that the case be handled at an international level. Jacky's brother Ian stated that there seemed to be very strange circumstances. There was far too much for her to live for, and too many people relying on her for her to simply check out. Despite these concerns, the Istanbul authorities cooperated fully and worked transparently. When Jacky's sister arrived in Turkey in the following days, police showed her crime scene photographs, the unedited security camera footage, and the complete documentation, including witness statements. The investigation concluded that there was no evidence that any objects or substances, other than those already in Jacky's possession, had been used in the incident. Both airport security and local police carefully reviewed the surveillance footage, and aside from her crying, there was nothing to indicate what was about to happen, nor was there any suspicious individual seen following her into the restroom. In July 2016, a coroner's inquest was held at a court in North London. Although family and friends had initially doubted the suicide theory, Coroner Andrew Walker ruled out all other possibilities, citing the absence of any evidence of third-party involvement. During the hearing, Jacky's sister Jenny said, "Her death followed a single moment of extraordinary stress and panic, and the decision was made in the heat of that moment. I don't believe it was planned. I don't think she intended beforehand to end her life." When the coroner asked whether she would like him to add that it was an act of sudden impulse, Jenny replied, "Yes." One of Jacky's colleagues, Anthony Borden, executive director of IWPR, said, "She was loved by everyone. We are completely shocked. Jacky was one of the best professionals working on Iraq and devoted nearly 10 years of her life to helping the country." As noted, the local police granted full access to all documentation, photographs, and camera recordings, and the family later stated, "The family is satisfied with the investigation conducted by the Turkish authorities. We were deeply skeptical of the initial reports, but based on what we have seen, we believe at this point that Jacky acted alone." The coroner's final ruling was that Jacky Sutton died by suicide in a sudden, impulsive act after missing her flight to Erbil. In 2020, the Australian National University Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies established the Jacky Ann Sutton Prize, awarded annually to the student achieving the highest results in the course, Politics in the Middle East. It seems almost certain that on any other day, had she truly needed money, Jacky would have called IWPR or her family to arrange another ticket or a transfer. And while waiting for the next flight, she could have immersed herself in Istanbul's famous nightlife, continued working on her dissertation, slept, or done virtually anything else. Her university professor, Amin Saikal, said in an interview before the inquest that he found the situation very strange and difficult to believe, noting that Jacky knew she could have contacted them immediately if she had travel problems, and help would have been arranged at once. The large amount of cash and the 2 bank cards found on her further suggest that she was not, in fact, without resources, especially if Turkish media reports about the sums were accurate. A simple online search showed that at the time, the nearest flight from Istanbul to Erbil cost around $582, while a next-day economy ticket started at about $198. Taking this into account, along with the fact that Jacky was an experienced world traveler who had made this journey many times before, her decision remains almost impossible to comprehend. The tragedy is unexplained in many ways, but perhaps the most haunting question is what thoughts could lead to such overwhelming anxiety and a sudden collapse that someone would discard everything they had built and planned over 50 years and end their life almost immediately. Perhaps she believed she was trapped in the terminal, or felt that, as a newly appointed director, she had failed her organization and the Iraqi people suffering under the expanding Islamic State. Or perhaps it was something else entirely
that we will never understand. What seems clear is that no one harmed her, and that any explanation may lie not in conspiracy, but in the weight of her life experiences and accumulated trauma.